Yeah, gewaltig. So yesterday we learned about the Chiddush of Palgin and Dibure. So if someone said Pliny Ravi Lertzoini, we believe him to be mitzaref with another aid to condemn the boil, but he himself is not puzzle. That's according to Rav. So Rav said this Chiddush. He said, Adam karv etalatmai. Since a person is karv etalatmai, morning, the ein Adam meitzim Russia. So we won't be believed. Lagabe, what he said, that he himself is a Russia, but he is believed in the testimony that he's condemning the boy. Amarava, Zokt Rava, turning on to Daf Yud Amar Aleph. Ba'alishti. Someone identifies somebody who was mezana with his wife, and eshish ish, so therefore he's chayiv misa. Hu va'acher mitzarfen lahargay. The husband and an additional aid would be mitzaref to be able to condemn the boya of a loyla harga, but he wouldn't be believed in his edus to kill his wife. Why zok Rashi? Levisha karavu atzla. He's a karav to her. Even though he is nema in this edus to condemn the boil, nevertheless he won't be believed lagabe his wife. Again, this once again illustrates the principle of palgina. He said one edus that Reuben was mezana with Rivka, right? Well, Lagabe Hai Meheman, he's Neman Lagabe Ruvain, Veloy Meheman Lagabe Hai, but he's not Neman Lagabe his wife. Frank the Gemara, my Kamash Valon, the Mefalgina Dibura Hainuach. What is Rava adding to what we already know by saying that even in the case of Pliny Balishti, you'll say Pelgin Diburi. He already said Pliny Ravani Lertzoni. There's also Pelgin Diburi. So why is Pliny Ravani Lertzoni any different than Pliny Baal Ishti? It's exactly the same principle of Palgin Dibure. Zokt Gemara, there's a difference. Maud Tema, Adam Karve Talatzmi Amrinam. A person who's a carve to himself, and therefore he can't be believed Lagabe the testimony that he's saying about himself. But Etel Ishtoi Loy Amrinam. But maybe he's not a carve to his wife, and you don't say Adam Karve Etel Ishtoi. And therefore I have to leave it a blank. We'll see what the therefore means. Kamash Valon, that you say Adam Karve Talishta. So if you would say that you don't say Adam Karve Talishta, what would the impact be? So let's say a Rashi learns Etalishta lo Amrinan, Adam Karve Leinya Pelginin Dibure. By his wife, you don't say Pelginin Dibure, and therefore V'hoyel umahemin ahahu dibura. Since we say he is Neman, Lagabi killing the boyel, Liktalua Nami Lidida, that Nemana should extend to the fact that she also was a willing participant, and she should be chayiv as well, Kamash Falon, that you say Adam Karbe Talishtai. However, there are other Rishonim who hold that that's not what the Gemara's Havamina was. The Gemara's Havamina was, since Adam ain't Karbe Talishtai, therefore you can't be Pagin Dibura, and the same way he's not Neman to have her killed because of this testimony, so too the perpetrator will not get killed either. So there's a shaila in the Rishonim how to learn this stage of the Gemara when the Gemara said, Avalei Talishtai Le'arinon Kamash Olon. Frank Tosh says, how could you say a person is not Karbe Talishtai? The top Tosh asks, Talishtai Le'arinon Avalgav de Masnisni. It's a Mishnah in Perek Zeboyer that we're going to learn soon. The Baal ki ishtoi le'inyanedus. So how could Rav possibly say that you don't say Adam Karbe Talishtai? Zok Gemara Sokatayt Chacha the Machmas Migui de Mehemen Lehargoi Mehemen Lehargoi. Normally, on his own to say edus about his wife, he doesn't have an Neman. But he is Neman here about the third party, so we would have thought that since he's Neman regarding the third party, that Nemanus would extend to what he's saying about her as well. V'yamarava, Ploni ba al nair hamarasa. What if an aid comes along, or Aiden came along and said that Pliny was Ba'al Mayim Barasa, which gets him Misa. And these two Aidim were Huzab. So now they get the Misa. The Allah is Neharagin, they get killed. But the question is, do they have to pay the Ksuba money that they were also trying to be mafsed her? The Allah is Ve'ein Mishalman Mammon. They don't pay the Ksuba money that they were trying to be mafsed her. Why not? Zokt Rashi. The Emishalman Mammon Tavis Anos Ksubasa Shiratzal Afsida, they were going to damage her by causing her to lose Uksiba. My timer. Why is it that they're not responsible to pay that? They only said Eidos on Pliny was Boyle and Naira Marasa. They didn't identify who that Naira Marasa was. So they obviously couldn't have come with the intent of trying to be mafsed or Ksuba. They didn't even itemize, they didn't even identify who this person was. But Bita Shal Pliny.
Isn't there a Kamle Midrabimene anyway?
So we're going to discuss it in just a minute. But they confirmed that it was an Naira, so they didn't tell us who it was. Vice versa would be, yeah. What about Bita Shal Pliny? So they did identify who this woman is. V'huzmu and their muzam. Neherogin, they get killed. Umishal min mamoin, and they have to pay money. So the first question that David just asked is, why don't you say Kam le'b'diravimine? Zakt Gemara, because mamoin lazeh unefash leish lazeh. Who were they trying to kill? They were trying to kill this girl. Who's the one who's going to lose the Mois Ksuba? The father of this girl will lose the Mois Ksuba, because we're talking about a Naira Hamid Urasa. She's not in the Su yet. So she's entitled to the Mois Ksuba. So therefore, since there's two separate addresses that their testimony is focused on, her, Lagabe her Misa, and the father of the girl, Lagabe the Mamoin, it's called Mamoin Lazeh, and the Fashish Lazeh, and you don't say Kamle B'Dirabimne. Now, we just learned on Amid Bey something that would seem to be contradictory, because the Gemara said, Amar Rav Yosef, Hevi Abal Edim Shizinsa, Hevi Av Edim Vizimum, Ledeval, Edibal Nairogin, the Ein Mishalman Mammon. So the question is, why are the Edibal Ein Mishalman Mammon? Here they're being mafsed Ksuba, and on Amar Aleph, we just learned they're being mafsed Ksuba. So why on Amar Aleph, when they're mafsed the Ksuba, we say they have to pay it to the father? But on Amud Beis, when we say they're mafsed the Ksuba, they don't have to pay it. So let's see if we can understand the Rashi, what the difference is. The Ein Mishalman Mammon on Tes Amud Beis, Aval Pi Shoyim Mafsid Nois Ksuba. They were causing her to lose the Ksuba. Ein Mishalman Toiva Sanos Ksubasa. They don't pay. Kedin Shar Zoyim make Ksuba Maseches Makris. The Kivon de Bishvila Heina Harogin. Why are they being killed? Because they tried to condemn her to death. Therefore, Ein Mishalman Law Mamoin, they don't pay her money. The Mischai Ben Avshoy Potim in Tashlumin. Now, on Amar Aleph, we said that the Chiv Mammon is not to her. The Chiv Mammon is to her father. And therefore, since there's two separate addresses, you do pay the Mammon. So Rashi asked this kasha. So let's have a look at Rashi. Umishalman Mammon Shabol Afsida Ksubasa Min Ha'irisin. Umishalman Tavishanah Ksuba Kedin Kol Zay Meksuba. V'lo Pligi Rava Ad Rabbi Yosef. This is not a contradiction between what Rava says right here and what we just looked at from Rabbi Yosef, who says that they don't pay Mammon because it's commonly with Rabbim Day. The Hasam Kiva the Nisas, over there she was already post Nisuin. If it's post Nisuin, who is entitled to the Ksuba money? No longer her father. And Naira Hamurasa, her father is entitled to her Ksuba money. Once she's in the Suah, she leaves the Rishus of her father. So therefore, the Hasam Kiva the Nisas, Hanech Tashlumin de Ksuba, the Dabo Mahava. The money was hers. So who would they have paid for wrongfully causing her to lose her Ksuba? They would have had to pay her. Well, her is the same target of their nefesh, of their condemning to death. V'chivin da'allah miktali, since they're being killed because they tried to kill her, loy mishalma law mammon, she's the same recipient, we don't pay her mammon. But in our case, where it's speaking about a Nair Murasa, not stam about an Isha Shizinsa, Hanach Tashlumen Dazo, the Avninu. Who's entitled to that Moish Ksuba? The father. The Choshvach Urel Leavia, until she's in the Suah, the father would be entitled to that. Mahavali Mama and Lazeh to the father, La'av, Unafoshes Lazeh, Mishum de Boyle, the Naira, Miktali. So therefore, since there's two separate addresses here, you do not say Kom Lei B'derabamine. V'yomer Rava, Pliny Rava Hashar. Aiden come and say that somebody was Roiveya Ashar. He was Boil Ashar. So he's Chayiv Misa. V'huzumu, and they were Muzam. Nerogin, they get killed. But the problem is that they were going to be causing a shar to die wrongfully, and somebody owned that shar. So they're being mazik somebody mammon. Nevertheless, for ein mishalman mammon, because they didn't say who shar it was. They just said a generic shar. But shoy shall ploini v'huzmu. If they identify that somebody was Reveas, the shar of Ruvain, well then they're trying to be mafsid Ruvain money. Therefore, nerogin, because they wanted to have the boil killed, umishalman mammon, and they have to pay mammon as well, because mammon lazeh unafoshesh lazeh. So once again, the Gemara asks, what is the chiddush of this case that Rava just taught us? Hasulamali hanuach. A moment ago, Rava already told us that if it's mammon lazeh unafoshesh lazeh, there's no din kamei b'drabim. Why do we need this other example? Because there was actually a discussion about whether or not it would be considered mammon lazeh and nefashos lazeh. Why? The boy Rava, Pliny Rava Shoiri. Pliny was Revei my shor. Mao, what's the halach? Miamrin, do you say Adam karve etalatzmai? So I can't be believed legabe things about myself. But the ein Adam karve etalamoinai. Maybe I'm not puzzled legabe saying edus about my mammon. Oidilma amrina and Adam karve etalamoinai. Or maybe you do say a person's karve etalamoinai and he shouldn't be believed. Bosa the boy hader pashta. After this Shiloh was asked, the Gemara was Pasha the Shiloh. The Gemara said, Adam karv etal atzmai, ve'ein Adam karv etal mamoinai, and therefore he is believed. Let's have a look at Rashi, Hadar Pashta. Lo yamrinan, we don't say, actually, let's go back to the Rashi before, when the Gemara had the Shiloh. Mi amrinan Adam karv etal mamoinai, and therefore, upalginan dibura. Therefore, we have to be split his words. Lehemune achavre, we'll believe him that they'll kill the perpetrator, but v'lo yashar, he's not neman legabe his shar, because Adam karba etzalamoinai. Adam aloy amrinan le'inyan palgi dibura Adam karba etzalamoinai. Aval gav the balgin le'il etzalatzma. Even though if it was relevant to himself, he would say palgi dibura, but relevant to his behemah, we don't say that, and his behemah would be condemned. Hadar pashta loy amrinan Adam karba etzalamoinai le'inyan palgi dibura. Vashor yisakal, and therefore the shor will get killed. And in this call, we have a Gemara in Tamur that said that if the Bailim themselves are the ones that are bringing to light that this animal should get killed, you don't kill the animal for it. So you see that Adam Karves on the mind. Zokrashi, that's a completely different case. He just said my animal was nearby, but he doesn't identify the perpetrator. Then you don't kill the animal, because we only kill the animal because of this animal it brought out the death of a person. You wouldn't kill the animal. Or even if you identify the person, but there was no second aid, and therefore the person won't get killed. But over here, where it's a case where there's a second aid, and the perpetrator is also getting killed, the animal would get killed as well. Therefore, so that's why Rava wanted to make a separate case out of it, because there was a shiloh about it, and he wanted to clarify that you don't say Adam Karav Eitzalat. Zok to Gemara weiter. Makos b'shloisha. We had a machloikis. How big of a bezin do you need to give malchus? So the Gemara says We know Hanamili. How do we know that there's 3 or there's 5? Omer Avhuna, Omer Kra, Ushafatim. So let's look at the pasuk from where we're learning Malchus. It says, Kiyiriv ben Anoshim, Minikshu ala Mishpat, Ushafatim, and they will paskin on them. It sounds like it's talking about at least 2 people. V'hitztiku Lashon Rabim, they will be matzdik as a tzaddik. V'hirshu, they will be mashas harosh. So you see, we're speaking in plurals over here. So Amar Avuna, Amar Kra, Ushafatim Shnayim. From Ushafatim, you know that there's at least 2 dayanim. But the Ein Bezin Shokol, we know you're not supposed to have an even Bezin. So therefore, Moisifin Aleim Oirechad, and that brings it to a total of Arei Kan Shloish. If that's the case, there's more Lashonis of plurality in this same pasuk. Ramad of Itztiku would also be Mashna Shnayim. V'hirshu would also be Mashna Shnayim. So you have 2, 4, 6 plus a tiebreaker, Harei Kan Shiva. So then you should require 7 dayanim, not just 3 dayanim. Zok the Gemara, the V'hitztiku and the V'hirshu are to teach us a completely separate drasha. To tell us about Ula's pshat. The Amar Ula, Remez la'edim zoymim min minatayr minay. Where is there a remez to teach us about edim zoymim? Frank Gemara, remez? Remez la'edim zoymim? Why would I need a remez? V'aksiv is a Meforsha pasuk that tells us about the halacha of edim zoymim. Kasher zoma. Ella, remez la'edim zoymim shaloikin minay. There are certain cases where we cannot do the kasher zoma. And Rashi gives an example. What if 2 Edim come along and say that Ruvain, who we thought was a Kohen, is a Ben Gerusha, Ben Chalutza? So the halacha is you can't turn around and they turn out being Zoymimin. So what do you do in the Kasher Zomam? You make the 2 Edim into a Gerusha and Chalutza, even if they're Kaihanim, so it's possible to passel them from Kuna. The problem says that Vasisim Loy Kasher Zomam, Loy Veloy Lazari. If you're going to make them into a cholo, that's automatically going to impact their children. So therefore, you cannot make such Edim Zoymin, you can't make them into chalolim, you can't do the kasher zolam on them. So whenever there's a situation where you can't fulfill the kasher zolam, how do you know that instead you give these Edim Malchus? When you cannot fulfill the kasher zolam. It says in the pasuk, "V'tztiku es hatzadik, v'hirshiu es harosh." So the problem is mishum v'tztiku es hatzadik, v'hirshiu es harosha, v'hayim bo nachos harosha. The pasuk is trying to tell you, if you read its pashut understanding, its pashut meaning is that someone violated a law, and due to that he is going to get malchus. So then all the pashut should say, what is the fact that somebody else was innocent or virtuous? How does that have anything to do with the fact that the Russia is getting malchus? So something else must be happening here. Ella, what this pasuk must be talking about is a case of Edim Zayim. Ella Edim that came along, Sherashu is the tzaddik. 2 Edim came along and said false testimony, and they made a tzaddik into a Russia. That happened before the pasuk starts to speak. Now the pasuk came along, but also Edi Achrini, and the second set of Edim came to be Mazim, the first Edim, and they were V'tztikus Tzaddik. So the pasuk begins after 2 Edim came and said false testimony on somebody and made him into a Rasha. Now a second set of Edim were Mazim, the first set of Edim, and thereby V'tztikus Tzaddik, they reestablished the tzidkis of the original victim of these 2 false Edim, the Mikar, who was the original tzaddik, the Shavinu Lahanach Rishayim. So V'tztikus Tzaddik, they made it the subject of these people's false testimony. They made him into a tzaddik, but Bereshus Rasha, in that same Edim Zoymin, they made these 2 Edim into a Rasha. Then it says V'hayim Binakos Rasha. So you see, there's Malchus sometimes for a Zoymin. So that's how we know that when you cannot fulfill the Kasher Zomam, you give them Malchus. Frank the Gemara, why do I need this pasuk of V'tztikus Tzaddik to teach us that you can give an Eid Zayim Malchus? But typically, Miloi Sana. There is a pasuk of Loi Sana B'Reach Shov. So you have a pasuk that specifically is a law against saying false edus. So let him get malchus for that. Zok Gemara mishum to have a lav shein by ma'isa. The chol lav shein by ma'isa ain't loikanu. A lav shein by ma'isa you don't get malchus for, and therefore from Lysana alone I wouldn't know. So you need the v'haya in bin hakoy sarosh. Why? Where do we know from that a lav shein by ma'isa you don't get malchus for? It's because right before it talks about malchus, it says the isser of loy sachsoim shor b'dishoy. You're not allowed to be chosim ashor. You're not allowed to muzzle him. So that's an action. It's an action of loy sachsoim shor. So we learn from there that the textbook lav for which someone gets malchus for has to be similar to the lav of chasima, and it has to involve a ma'aser where you put a muzzle on your animal. And from there we learn that the only time you get malchus for a lav is if it was a lav sheyesh b'ma'aser. Now this is also under dispute, because there are those who learn that lav de chasima is not necessarily done only through a ma'aser. You could muzzle your animal without doing a ma'aser. Like when the animal's about to eat, you say, "Oh, shoot, go away," right? So that's a lav shein by ma'aser. So that's a whole discussion. But according to the Shita who holds that you don't get malchus for lav shein by ma'aser, it's learned from the lav the chasima. Okay, let's have a look at Tosfos. V'chalav shein b'ma'aser ain't like in the love. Correct Tosfos. What about Rabbi Yehuda? Afilu Rabbi Yehuda the isle b'chol dukta loich in the love. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds that lav shein b'ma'aser you are loike for, and he will learn that the lav loisach so maybe does not include a ma'aser because you could have shoot it away. Nevertheless, osi hai shinuya, you still need this teretz. You still need the loisana and the v'hayim bin hakois. You know why? You know what Rabbi Yehuda's makar l'chala terakula is that you don't need a lav sheish b'ma'aser. He knows it from edim zaymin, according to Rabbi Yehuda perkam demakris. And therefore, how would I know it by edim zaymin gufa? V'lav v'haya in bin hakois rasha the golilon be'edim zaymin. If it wasn't for the extra pasuk of bin hakois rasha that tells us that you actually do get malchus for this lav shein b'ma'aser, how I would have thought the chol dukta lav shein b'ma'aser ain't like it. So you need two psukim by edim zaymin to tell us at least that by edim zaymin you get malchus, and Rabbi Yehuda holds you learn from edim zaymin l'chol terakula that a lav shein b'ma'aser is like in the lav. Gewaltig zok the heilige Gemara weiter. Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amru be'eshrim v'shloisha. There was even a shita who held that for malchus you need to have 23 dayanim. My time with Rabbi Shmuel. What is the reasoning for Rabbi Shmuel? If you remember, yesterday we learned one of the explanations for the machlokes of why by Moti Shemra you should need 23 dayanim. We learned it was a case where they warned him for malchus and not for misa. And the machlokes is, do you need 23 for malchus? So this is the Rabbi Yishmael that we were referring to earlier, who holds you need 23 for malchus. Amar Abaya, we know it from Osya Rasha Mechai v'misas. We learn it out of Exer Shava from the word Rasha by Chai v'misas. Hacha tifhacha b'aya im bin hakois Rasha, referring to malchus. Uksefasam by misa. Asher hu Rasha Lomus. Mal alon besem shloisha. Just like to dan on a case of misa, you need 23 dayanim. Avkan be'esem v'shloisha. So too for malchus you need 23 dayanim. Rava says I don't need that svar. It's malchus b'makom misa imedis. Malchus is in the place of misa. Rashi has a very interesting shot. Rashi says malchus b'makom misa imedis. The kivan the avar al azharas boyroi royu lamus. Anybody who does malchus, anybody who does an avera and violates a law that the Torah commanded him to stay away from, he's already deserving of death. Umisa zu, what type of misa did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say that the person who is over a law will get? Umisa zu, the misa of malchus, konos alav akasav, the Torah sentenced him with, Rehu ka'achas of the misa. Malchus is like a misa. The hereg just like each one of those misas are a type of misa, havanami malchus to achas from the misas. Malchus is just like a Misa. We look at Malchus like it's a Misa. You survive it, but it's just like a Misa, and therefore it would require 23 dayanim. So, Frank the Gemara, that's the case we have a problem. If really Malchus is just like a Misa, well, then why is it that we're so careful to assess how many Malchus someone can absorb, and we don't give him more than that because we don't want to kill him? If it's just another Misa, so give him the Malchus, and if he dies, he dies. Let's give him the full Malchus. And if he dies, he dies. Anyway, you're just equating it with another Misa. Amar Lei, so Rav Ashi said, no, there's a special pasuk that tells us that by Malchus, he shouldn't die. Amar Krava Nikla Achicha Leinecha Ki Malchus, when you give him Malchus, Agaba de Chaye Malchus. You have to give a live person Malchus, not a dead person. So if he's going to die after 25 Malchus and you continue on to 39, many of these Malchus, 14 of these Malchus are given on a dead person. So that's not what the Torah wants, and therefore you have to figure out, you have to assess this person, how many lashes he can handle. For the Gemara, Elahada Tanya, we have a problem, because the Mishnah, the Brisa says, Amdu lekabel esrim. They said he could do 20, which means after 20 he will live. If he gets to 21st Malka, he's going to die. The halach is, Ein Malka noisoi, Ella Makais Haruis Lishtalish. When Malchus was given to a person, Rashi tells us, it was always in sets of 3. 2 lashes on his back and 1 lash on his chest. So any amount of Malchus that's sentenced to a person will always be divisible by 3. It will always be a multiple of 3 because they have to be done in sets. So since 20 is the max that he can absorb, and 20 is not divisible by 3, the Chamahain Tam Nisri. He gets 18 lashes. Break the Gemara, I don't understand. Let's give him the full 21. Lamachia Esrim V'chada, and if he dies after getting that lash, no problem. V'chimayis V'hach Chada Lemos. Why not? The Kimachis, when they hit him, Agabad Chaya Kimachis, he was alive. The last lash killed him, but he was alive when he got it. So Oy Bazoy, if you're telling me that Malchus is just another version of a Misa, so why don't they give him even the last lash, which is what we'll call the last straw that will break the camel's back? Give that to him. Amalei, Rabash says no. The pasuk tells us otherwise. Amar Kra, the Nikla Achicha Leinecha, even Acher Shalaka Achicha Ba'ina. After he gets the Malchus, he has to be your Achicha, meaning he still has to be amongst the living, Veleka. So the Hakbad is not only that you should give the Malchus to a live person, the Hakbad is after the Malchus will be over, we want that the recipient should be alive. Okay, the next halach in the Mishnah was Ibur HaChodesh B'Shloisha. Ibur HaChodesh needed 3. And we were wondering what Ibur HaChodesh means, right? It's either Kiddush HaChodesh. So what was Ibur? So Zok to Gemara, Chishuv Loikatan. It doesn't say you need 3 dayanim to figure out should Rosh Chodesh be on day 30 or should Rosh Chodesh be on day 31. Kiddush Loikatan. It doesn't say Kiddush HaChodesh either. That whenever they accept the Eidim, they make the announcement of Mekudesh. It doesn't say that either. Eli Ibor. It says Ibor. What I don't understand, Frank Gemara, is why do you need a Bezdin to be Mekadesh a Chodesh that has 30 days? Let him not do anything at all. We know a Chodesh is either 29 days or 30 days. If they're not Mekadesh the Chodesh on day 30, so of course the day 31 will be Mekudesh. So why do they need to do anything? If you're going to tell me Mr. Cheshbon whether or not they should add a day, that I would understand. But you're not saying you need it for the Cheshbon. They're needed to create an extra month. Why are they needed? The moment they needed to create an extra day in the month. Once they're not Mekadesh or Chodesh on day 30, so then by default it's going to be on day 31. As an aside, if it was Chishuv, what exactly are they calculating? Why are they calculating? So the Rashi tells us there's reasons why they would want to push Rosh Chodesh off one day. For instance, what would be if Yom Kippur would fall out on a Friday, right? Or if Yom Kippur would fall out on a Sunday. there would be 2 days where they couldn't do malacha, which means what they would eat. I'm sorry, not on Sunday. If Yom Kippur was on a Sunday, so what would happen is what they would have to break their fast on would be wilted vegetables, because they had Shabbos before, they couldn't do anything with these vegetables. So therefore, they want to create a gap. They don't want Shabbos and Yom Kippur being back to back. That's one reason why they would want to push it off. The other reason was if Chas v'Shalom somebody dies on Shabbos and they can't bury him till Motzi Yom Kippur, the mace will be left around for 2 days, and therefore they would want to add a day to the month. So that would be the cheshbon. But I'll call upon them Ibor. What special impact, what special input does the Besdin require? Loy liktisha umemela liapa. Omar Abaye Tani Kiddush HaChodesh. It's really Kiddush HaChodesh. That's what it means. It's Kiddush HaChodesh. When it says Ibor, it means Kiddush. Like a Chesur Mechsra. Like we're going to amend we're amending the Mishnah. Tani Namihachi, we even have a brisa that supports this. Kiddush HaChodesh, the Ibor Hashana B'Shloisha, the Rabbeir. So you see, it's really Kiddush HaChodesh. Even though the Mishnah used the word Ibor. Frank the Gemara, Amar Rava, but Ibor Katan. And Rashi explains, Chesur Mechsra means it's missing a word, it needs a little bit of amendment, but a Tana will never use a completely wrong word to describe what he's trying to describe. So Chesur Mechsra isn't a license to do anything you want. Chesur Mechsra is to say it's missing a word, but for a Tana to select a completely different word like Ibor, instead of selecting the word Kiddush, that's not acceptable. That wouldn't have happened. So when the Mishnah says Ibor, it must mean Ibor, and therefore we need to understand what it means. Allah Amar Rava, Kiddush b'yoim Ibor b'shloisha. If they're making Rosh Chodesh on day 30, which means it was a 29-day month, then they would need Kiddush. The Besdin would have to say Mekudesh. However, Achar Ibor, if they weren't making Rosh Chodesh on day 30, which means really by default it's automatically going to be on day 31, like a Kiddush, we don't need Kiddush at all. So what it really means is Ibor doesn't need Kiddush so when the Mishnah says Ibor HaChodesh, Rashi explains it means Ibor HaChodesh if they decided to make Rosh Chodesh on the day of Ibor, which means on day 30, that's when they require Kiddush. Because they have to announce Rosh Chodesh today, because it could be tomorrow. But if they didn't announce Rosh Chodesh on the day of the Ibor on day 30, then by default it's tomorrow and no Kiddush HaChodesh is required. So what our Mishnah means when it says Ibor HaChodesh, it means if they wanted to make Rosh Chodesh on day 30, it would require them to be Mekadesh the Chodesh. But I use the word Ibor to tell you that we're only required to make Kiddush HaChodesh if it's done on the day of Ibor, on day 30. Because if it was done on day 31, they don't need Bezin to proclaim that. Umani, who is the Shita who holds that the Bezin only has to be Mekadesh the Chodesh if it's on day 30, if Rosh Chodesh is day 30, not if Rosh Chodesh is day 31. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadaki, the Tanan we learned, Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadak Omer, Imloi Nira Bismanoi, what if the moon was not sighted after the 29th day to make the 30th day Rosh Chodesh? Ein Mekachin Oisai. We don't need Bezdin to be Mekadesh the Chodesh anymore. Shekfar Kitchu Bashamayim. We already know by default Rosh Chodesh must be on day 31. And therefore, our Mishnah means Ibor. The only time Bezdin has to be Mekadesh the Chodesh is if they're proclaiming day 30, which is the day of the Ibor, if they're proclaiming that day as Rosh Chodesh. Rav Nachman Amar, the opposite. Kiddush Achar Ibor is Bishloisha. They only have to be Mekadesh if Rosh Chodesh is day 31. But Yom Ibor, if Rosh Chodesh is day 30, Leka Kiddush, then you wouldn't need, which is exactly the opposite of what we're saying now. Umani, who is it going according to? Plimai. It's going according to the Tana Plimai. The Tanya he taught us, Plimai Omer, Bismanoi Ein Mekachin Oisai. If Rosh Chodesh is on day 30, the Bezin doesn't have to say Mekudesh. Shaloi Bismanoi, but if Rosh Chodesh will be on day 31, then Mekachin Oisai, only then does it require a pronouncement of the Bezin of Mekudesh. What would be the reasoning for that? So Plimai, Rashi explains, Plimai Bismanoi Mekachin Oisai, Shein tzarech lasos chizik l'davar shrei bizmanibo. It's the norm for Rosh Chodesh to be on day 30. It doesn't need a special proclamation. But day 31 is not so typical. It's not at the right time. It's a little late because we know the Moiled is 29 and a half days. So really, day 30 should be Rosh Chodesh. So that doesn't need an announcement. If it'll be day 31, only then does it require an announcement. And the Ibra Chodesh means if we're going to make Rosh Chodesh on day 31. Okay? Ravashi is a third pshat. La'olam chishav katan. Really, it means chishav. Umay ibur chishav the ibur. It's calculating when Rosh Chodesh should be. So why does it say ibur? Why does it say chishav? The adi to kaboy lemisli ibur shana, since the wording that the Tana selected when discussing adding a month to the year, since for that discussion, the Tana chooses the word Ibur, Tana Nami Ibur Chodesh. Therefore, the Tani decided to use the same parallel lashon when you're talking about the Chodesh. But really means Chishuv. So what does that mean to tell us? Chishuv Chodesh in. They only need 3 dayanim to determine whether or not Rosh Chodesh should be on day 30 or whether Rosh Chodesh should be on day 31. But there's no Kiddush at all required. There's no Bezdin at all required for Kiddush HaChodesh, whether it's on day 30 or it's on day 31. Kiddush HaChodesh loy. So Oibazoi, who is our Mishnah holding like? In other words, who holds that Bezdin does not have to announce Mekudesh neither on day 30 or on day 31? Mani Rabbi Eliezer, he Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Eimer, Bein Bismanoi, Bein Shaloi Bismanoi, Ein Mekached Oisai. There's no halacha of Bezdin being Mekadosh to Chodesh. There's no such thing. Shenemar, how do we know? Because the pasuk says Lagabi Yovel, the Kidashtem Eshnas HaChamishim Shana. The Torah specifically tells Bezdin that they have to be Mekadosh year 50 for Yovel. And that's the only time you find where the Torah specifically states something about Bezdin being Mekadosh. So we say Shana Mata Mekadosh. The chiv that the Torah is teaching us that you have to be Mekadosh is years. And the Rashi says it's not just the 50th year, it's Shnash Shel Kol Yovel v'Yovel Mikachin Bezdin L'Shem Yovel. No, it is. It's just the 50th year. The 50th year they have to be Mekadosh. But there is no mitzvah whatsoever for Bezdin to Mekadosh Chodoshim. So at the end of the day, Pshat in our Mishnah of Ibra Chodesh, it either means they need to be Mekadosh the Chodesh if the Chodesh is day 30, or it means they need to be Mekadosh the Chodesh if the Rosh Chodesh is day 31, or it means they don't need to be Mekadosh the Chodesh at all. They need to figure out should they add an extra day or not, but no Kiddush Chodesh is required. So why did it use the Lashon Ibur and not Chishev? Because it wants to keep a parallel Lashon to the Lashon Ibur that the Mishnah uses discussing the year. So if you remember, we said that you have to start off with 3 dayanim to discuss whether or not we should even have discussions of Ibur Ashana, of adding an extra month. Then, once they sit down, the discussion should require 5 dayanim, and before they make the conclusion, they should have 7 dayanim there. So where do you get this sliding scale from? Tanya, we learned. Kate said, how did it work out when there was a discussion of adding an other sheni? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, "B'shloisha maschilim." They start off with 3, u'v'chamisha noisin v'noisnin, and they have their discussion, their debate with 5. V'goimrin b'shiva, and they make their final vote with 7 dayan. So let's say what happened is they wanted to discuss, should we even have a discussion about adding a month to the year? And the Gemara is going to elaborate as to the different reasons why they would make an other shade. We know the obvious reason is it doesn't line up with the seasons, but there's a lot of other factors that were taken into consideration when they were deciding whether or not they should be ma'aber d'sham. So they had 3 people. Echad oimer leishev. One of the 3 said, "Yeah, I think we should consider this matter." Ushnayim barmim shaloi leishev. And 2 out of the 3 said, "Nah, I don't see any need to even discuss Ibur Ashana. The halach is batal yachad b'miutai," and they disband. There's no discussion. But what if Shnayim barmim leishev? The echad oimer shaloi leishev. 2 out of the 3, the Rav said, yes, I think we should discuss, we should consider making an extra month of Adar. So then, in order to have the discussion, Moisifin Aleim Oichnaim, they had 2 more for a total of 5. And then V'noisnin V'dover, they have a debate. Now, during the debate, what if Shnaim Armim Tzricha, Ushlosham Ein Tzricha? Again, Batlu. The discussion is over. The Rav of 5 decided we're not going to be adding them. But if Shnaim B'mi'utan, I'm sorry, Batlu Shnaim B'mi'utan, sorry. Shlosh Armim Tzricha, but if 3 out of 5 said they need to add an extra month, Ushnaim Armim Ein Tzricha, then we need to go to the next level. Now we need a total of 7, and then they could pass in halach l'maisa whether or not they're going to add a month. She'ein haminyan pachos mishiv. You need to have at least 7. Now we still don't know where these numbers come from, but we know there's a 3, there's a 5, and there's a 7. Where does these 3 numbers come from? Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani had a discussion, a disagreement with one of his friends. Umani, who was his friend, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Or maybe it was Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, V'chadi Imei, Umani, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. So either way, one is the friend and one is the other friend. Chad Omar, one says, Keneged Birchas Kahanim. What does Birchas Kahanim have to do with that? The first pasuk in Birchas Kahanim has 3 psukim. Yivarecha has 3 words. Yivarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. The second pasuk in Birchas Kahanim has 5 words. Yar Hashem panav elecha v'choneka. And the last pasuk of Birchas Kahanim has 7 words. Yish Hashem panav elecha v'yasim l'chol shalom. It goes connected that. There's a long marsha to explain what's the connection b'chlal between Birchas Kahanim and Ibra Chodesh. So the Rashbam gets into a lot. The Marsha gets into a long shtickle of the considerations. We'll see from the Gemara that the Chachamim had to come from Yehuda, who's in Eretz Yisrael, and from the Galil, and from Evar Yarden. You needed representatives from all over because everybody was impacted by it. Because, for instance, if you make an extra month of Adar, that means the Oiler Regal of Sukkot are going to end up having to go home in the rain because it pushes everything off into the winter. So there's a lot of people who are impacted by it. So, and in fact, it impacts people's parnasa, because if you push off the month again, people who don't have enough food, they're not going to have Yoshan's food because now you're pushing off Pesach by a month. And if I'm using up my food that I don't have enough, I need Pesach to come so I could be matter the winter wheat. So there was a lot of consideration. V'rech Hashem yishmerecha is lashon parnasa. I didn't know the first bracha in Birchas Kahanim is going on parnasa. So that's why that was relevant. And then he goes through all the considerations and the different reasons to pull in either direction, and that has to do with Birchas Kahanim. The Chad Omar and the other one said Shloisha Keneged Shomerei Asaf. These were generals that were around supporting the kings. Chamisha Meiroi Pnei Melech and Shiva Roi Pnei Melech. So if you look at Rashi, the Shomerei Asaf were servicing Jewish kings, and the Chamisha Meiroi Pnei Melech were also Jewish kings. But the 7, which is Roye Pnei Melech, Rashi says on the 7, it's referring to the 7 people, the Shiva Sorei Paris Madai, who were servicing Achashverosh. So Tosfos asks, we're basing our Kiddush HaChodesh on Achashverosh. So Tosfos brings, no, there were other Jewish Malachim that also had 7 Roy Pnei Melech. It's not referring to Achashverosh. Okay, Amar Le Abaye, Le Rabbi Yosef, Ada Idna, my timer, Le Parish Lon Mar Hachi. You never told us this. Why didn't you ever tell us up until now that there's this concept of 3, 5, and 7 and the reason for them? Amalu Loy Haviyadana that's Rechisu. I didn't know that you were interested to know. Have you ever asked me something and I withheld that information? No. So had you asked me, I would have been glad to share these reasons with you. Okay, Zok Gemara, Zaman, Nosi, Tzorech Gedi, these are Siman. Tanarban, Ein Ma'arvenes Hashana, you're not allowed to add an extra month to the year. Ella b'mizumonim law. What is b'mizumonim law? Shezeminu hanosi mibe'er. The Nosi, from the day before, had to initiate this whole process and invite the Bezdin, I think you should consider adding a month to the year. Then only can you do it. Maisa, Rabbi Gamliel, to Amar, Rabbi Gamliel, who was the Nasi, said, Hashkimu li shiva laliyah. Please tomorrow morning bring 7 people into the attic so that you could deliberate as to whether or not we should add a year. So it was initiated by Rabbi Gamliel. Hishkim umatzah shemaina. When they came in the next morning, there were actually 8 Rabbanim there. So the Nasi was upset because there's someone here who's not invited. Amar mi hu shalosh shaloi b'shus. Who is here and not invited? Yereit, he should leave. So what happened? Amar Shmuel HaKatan, who was a great Tana, and he was also big enough. The Amar, he said, Anihu shalish shaloi b'shus. I'm the guilty party. Of course, I didn't come to be part of this Bezdin because I was not invited, but I wanted to see the deliberations to learn Torah. I just wanted to learn. So Rabbi Gamliel told him, Shev b'ni Shev, sit, don't leave, because really, you should be the one who's the best, and you're the greatest of us all. But what should we do? Chazal said that 7 is the limit. Only when people are invited. Zok to Gemara some insight. Shmuel was invited. Really, Shmuel HaKatan was invited. So why did he say, I wasn't invited? Shmuel only wanted to protect the person who would have been otherwise humiliated for having come not invited. So Shmuel took the heat for him. Okay, we'll stop here. There'll be a beautiful Agad Gemara tomorrow about similar stories where one person covered for the other. Okay, everyone should have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos Chanukah.